January of 1990, emergency workers broke down the door of a remote Scottish cottage. They found a family of 4 inside, seated at the dining table, perfectly upright, eyes open, frozen solid. They had been dead for at least 3 days, but the food in front of them was still steaming. Nobody ever explained that. Not the coroner, not the investigators, not the 2 officers who walked out of that cottage and never returned to active duty. That case was buried. The cottage was not. And 30 years later, my friend Roy walked through that same door, alone. This is the final knock, and what happened to Roy started the night he heard the 4th chair move. Roy is not the kind of man who believes in anything he cannot measure. He's an architectural researcher, mid-30s, the type of person who organizes his bookshelf by publication date and corrects people who use the word paranormal at dinner parties. Last December, his firm sent him to document a heritage cottage, northern mountains of Scotland, remote, off-grid, accessible only by a single mountain road that closes completely in heavy snow. He was supposed to spend 4 days there, alone. Just Roy, his laptop, and a 100-year-old building that needed to be cataloged. He arrived on December the 12th. The cottage was a British-era structure, high ceilings, stone walls, floorboards that announced every single step you took. And at the center of the ground floor, a massive dining hall, a long oak table, and 4 heavy wooden chairs. The first thing Roy noticed when he walked through that door was not the cold. It was not the dark. It was a smell. Damp cotton, rotten ice, like a freezer left open for weeks. Inside a room no one had entered in years. He checked the pipes, the walls, the ceiling. Nothing was broken. Nothing was leaking. The house itself was breathing that smell out. Slowly, like it had been holding it in, waiting for someone to finally open the door. Roy wrote it off as old building odor. He set up his laptop at the oak table, sat in the chair closest to the window, and made sure the other 3 chairs were pushed perfectly under the table. He was meticulous about order. That would matter later. The first night passed without incident. It was the second night, December the 13th, that Roy's notes mentioned something he almost didn't write down. At 2 in the morning, he went to the kitchen to make coffee. He was gone maybe 4 minutes. When he walked back into the dining hall, he stopped. The chair directly across from his laptop, the one on the opposite end of the table, was pulled out. Not far, maybe 3 inches, but it was perfectly positioned. Not at an angle, not randomly shifted. Pulled straight back, the way you pull a chair out when you were about to sit down and face someone. Roy stood in the doorway for a long time, his coffee going cold in his hand. He walked over. He looked under the table. He checked every window. He got down on his hands and knees and examined the floorboards for any slope or unevenness that might cause a chair to slide. Nothing. He pushed the chair back in, hard. He went back to work. He told himself the floor was uneven. Old buildings settle. Wood expands in cold. There was an explanation. There was always an explanation. He believed that, right up until the next night, December the 14th. 3:15 in the morning. Roy was in bed. His bedroom door was slightly open, just enough to give him a direct line of sight into the dark dining hall. He wasn't asleep. He was staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind hammer the cottage walls, when he heard it. Screech. The slow, agonizing sound of wood dragging on wood. Roy sat up, in the dim blue moonlight filtering through the dining hall window. He could see the silhouette of the table, the chairs. The fourth chair was moving, not fast, slowly, deliberately, sliding back from the table, the way it had the night before. But this time, Roy was watching it happen. There was no hand, no shadow, no shape. And then the chair tilted. The front legs lifted slightly off the ground. The back legs groaned, under invisible weight, like something heavy had just sat down. Roy grabbed his phone. He hit record. He whispered, "Who's there?" No voice answered, but the temperature answered. The warmth in the room vanished in seconds. Roy watched his own breath appear in thick white mist in front of his face, and then the smell hit him. That same damp, cotton, rotting ice smell from the first night. Except now, it was inside his throat, inside his chest. He gagged. He pressed his back against the headboard. He could not move. He left the phone recording for 11 minutes before he finally moved again. He sent me that recording 3 weeks later, and when I listened to it, behind his breathing, behind the silence of that room, I heard them. 4 patterns of breath, his and 3 others. 2 heavy, slow, raspy, like lungs that had been frozen and thawed too many times, and 2 small ones, shallow and quick, like children, trying very hard not to make a sound. Roy could not leave the next morning. The blizzard had arrived overnight. The mountain road was buried under 4 feet of snow. His car was completely sealed in. His phone had 1 bar of signal that came and went with the wind. He was locked inside, desperate for any explanation. He tore through the cottage's old storage cabinets. In the back of a bottom drawer, wrapped in deteriorating cloth, he found a leather ledger. Property records, guest registries going back to the 1940s. He turned the pages slowly. Decades of names, families, couples, research teams. And then he found it. January 1990. A family of 4 had rented the cottage during what locals called the Great Snowfall of that year. A father, a mother, and 2 young children, a boy and a girl. They had planned to stay 5 days. The blizzard that year lasted 2 weeks. They ran out of firewood on day 6. No way to call for help. The mountain road had closed. The same day it closed for Roy. Roy read that line twice, then a 3rd time. When emergency services finally broke down the door, on January the 19th, they found all 4 of them in the dining hall, not in bed, not huddled together on the floor for warmth, seated at the oak table, perfectly upright, 1 chair each, eyes open, staring across the table at each other, as if waiting for someone to speak first, frozen so completely that when the rescuers tried to move the father, they said his fingers snapped. Roy set the ledger down. He looked up at the dining hall, at the table, at the 4 chairs. He counted them. 1, 2, 3, 4. The same 4 chairs, the same table, the same room. And Roy was sitting in one of them. He had been sitting in one of them this entire time. Roy escaped the next morning when the sun briefly broke through. He drove down the mountain without stopping. 14 hours straight back to London. He didn't eat. He didn't stop for petrol until the gauge was already past empty. He thought he had left it behind. The cottage, the cold, the smell. He was wrong. 2 weeks after he returned, he called me. His voice was different, flat, like someone speaking from the bottom of a very deep well. He said, "My heating is at 80 degrees, but I can see my breath in my own flat." He went to the bathroom. The mirror was covered in frost, not condensation. Frost. In a heated London apartment, in the middle of the morning. He wiped it away with his sleeve and saw his face in the glass, and in the corner of the mirror, in the thin mist already forming again, there was a word, traced by something small, a child's finger. One word. Cold. He sent me a photograph 2 days later. He had bought a dining table. He didn't own one before the trip. He told me it just felt right to have one. 4 chairs. In that photograph, behind the table, his bedroom door is slightly open. And in the condensation forming on that door, 4 sets of handprints, pressed flat against the surface. 2 large, 2 small. They didn't stay in the cottage, Roy. They followed the warmth. They followed you. Roy called me again 4 days ago. He didn't say anything. He just left the line open. I stayed on. For 6 minutes, I stayed on, and I listened. I heard the sound of a chair being pulled across a wooden floor. Then another. Then another. Then the 4th. I have called Roy back 17 times since that night. He has not answered. Not once. His last message to me, sent at 4:03 in the morning, was a photograph, his dining table, 4 chairs, all pulled out, and Roy, sitting in one of them, eyes open, staring straight ahead, at nothing. His skin in that photograph looks like ice. I don't know where Roy is now. I don't know if what's sitting in that chair is still Roy at all. What I do know is this. They froze to death waiting for a warmth that never came. And death didn't end that waiting. It only changed what they were waiting for. They don't want to hurt you. That is the worst part. They just want to borrow your warmth for a little while. They don't realize they will take all of it. So before you close this video, check your thermostat. If the room feels colder than it should. If you can see your breath, don't look behind you. Don't look at the empty chair. And if you hear something dragging across your floor tonight, it's already too late to pretend you're not home. Some doors you never stop hearing. Some knocks never end. This was the final knock. If this found you, you already know what to do. Subscribe, because next time we go somewhere colder, and something there has already pulled out your chair.